Hi, team. All right, so you just took your quiz. Yay! I'm so proud of you. If you haven't taken it yet, stop the video right now and take your quiz. All right? Get it over with, be done. Remember, we're dropping the lowest grade. Okay? All right, so I want to remind you that your homework tonight, you are completing question number 6 in your reading guide. All right, so let's talk about what we're doing today. We're going to take notes on our scientific method. So I'm sure you talked about this probably in elementary school and middle school. And to be honest, you probably talked about it in science at some point in high school as well. We're going to go back over it because it is really, really important to understand how this works. Because when we start looking at scientific experiments, if we don't know these steps and the order that they go in, it's actually a little bit difficult to understand either the results of the experiment or why it's significant. Okay? So once we do that, then we're going to do a little activity where you're going to apply part of the scientific method to your college search. All right, and I'll explain that when we get there. Okay, so you're going to set up your notes. Haven't switched the date yet. I promise you next week it will be totally switched. Everything will be on point. I know. We're still in our scientific foundations unit, and our topic today is the scientific method. All right. Okay, so let's talk about some of the goals because they're a little bit different in psychology than they are for like just normal any kind of science. Although they do overlap, they're a little bit more specific in psychology. So when we're using the scientific method to run psychological experiments, that's because we need to be able to describe a behavior very clearly and very precisely. So the method has to enable us to do that in a way that is exact. If we are not following the method, then we're not going to be able to describe behavior in a way that's exact. And we're going to walk through an example, so I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. We also use the method because we want to see if we understand correctly. And the method gives us a place to predict, and then it gives us a place to see whether that prediction came true, if maybe we prove something else, maybe it's inconclusive, right? So we need to know what that starting prediction was so that we can understand our results, right? And the third thing is that we want to solve problems, right? We're using the scientific method so that we can very clearly show this affects this, or these two things are connected, right? If we're just kind of going about it haphazard and not using the scientific method, then we can't demonstrate that to be true. Okay, so I want to give you a quick note here. You're going to set up with 2 columns going forward, because what you're going to see is the steps of the scientific method on one side, and then I'm going to give them to you an example, excuse me, on the other side. You only need to copy the scientific method part. I'm giving you the example so that you can see what these steps would look like in a real experiment, okay? Okay, so the first step is that we need to formulate a testable hypothesis. So just to be clear, a hypothesis is a very, very specific, educated guess. Sometimes it's about cause and effect. So if A, then B happens. Sometimes it's not, though, and that's fine. Okay, so in the study that we're going to look at, their hypothesis was that red clothing will lead men to view women as more sexually desirable. So I want to pause here for a second and talk about the specificity I mentioned before. You see how it says red clothing? It doesn't say revealing clothing. It doesn't say provocative clothing. It doesn't say tight clothing, right? Those 3 are actually not specific enough. What I consider to be revealing or provocative may not be to someone else. What I consider to be modest might be revealing and provocative to someone else. So those kinds of terms they're not specific enough. They don't mean the same thing to every person. Okay, so notice that they very clearly said red clothing. Other options would have been a V-neck shirt versus a button down like I'm wearing, or a crew neck like a t-shirt, right? Those are very specific. We all know what those mean. There's no room for a question or discussion there. Okay, so back to our scientific method. The second step is to select your research method. We'll go into depth about those next week, and to design the study itself. So we need to make sure that the type of research method that we're selecting is appropriate to the question we're trying to answer. If we choose the wrong research method, we're not going to get usable data or usable answers, right? And we need to plan in detail who's taking part in this study, what are the things that we need to control or ask for, what's the procedure going to be, what are the questions we need to ask. So this is really where we do that like planning stage. So in this study that we're looking at, they chose to do experiment for their research method. So that means it took place in a lab and it was very tightly controlled. The people who participated in this study are undergraduate, so that means college age, heterosexual, straight, not colorblind males. If they're colorblind, they won't know, they might not be able to tell the difference between red and green. So we can't use that data because our hypothesis is specifically about red clothing. So we need to make sure they can actually see the color red, right? And we're going to concentrate on the blouse. So their plan in detail is very specific. They're going to show a form-fitting blouse. Everything else is neutral, right? Okay, so the next step is just to collect the data. So again, depending on the type of research methods that they use, they're going to do this in different ways. Maybe it's an observation. They're watching what people do. Maybe it's a survey where people answer the questions. Maybe it's a test. They hook up electrodes, whatever that might be. So in the study that we're looking at, their procedure was to give the participants a photo of a woman and a questionnaire. And then the participants randomly either saw a woman in a red blouse or a woman in a blue blouse. And it was random. They didn't look at a guy and be like, okay, I'm going to give you blue. They didn't know what was happening. They just gave them the random one, okay? And then they collected the questionnaires from there. So then when they're analyzing the data, which is our fourth step, and drawing conclusions, right? So in this step, we're going to convert findings to numbers. So for instance, in our questionnaire, they're going to look at the ratings that straight men gave the red blouse and that they gave the blue blouse, and they're going to put numbers to those. So which one was higher? They might graph the data. We're going to do some work with that. They might use statistics to interpret the data. We're going to do some work with that too. So you'll understand all these ways of analyzing data when we're done with this unit. The last step of the scientific method is to report your findings. So that's usually publishing your research results in some type of, journal, publication, newspaper, whatever. Sometimes that can also be giving a talk, but really when we're talking about like the sciences and experimenting, publishing is a thing that you pretty much have to do. So that's the most common way you're going to see people's results. And just so that you guys know, for that process, articles you don't just submit it and then it gets published and everything is fine. You submit it and then it gets reviewed by other people, peers, who are in this same line of work as you. They may not be studying the same thing, but they are also experimental psychologists or cognitive psychologists or whatever. And they're going to make sure that your data is reliable. If they find a problem with it, or they find that you faked the data or something like that, then it does not get published. Okay, so if you have any questions or you need to clarify anything, you can hit me up with an email. You can come to office hours. whatever works best for you. Going forward from here, you're going to actually apply the first 2 steps of the scientific method to the college search in your class, right? So remember, the first step is a hypothesis, and the second step is looking at figuring out what type of research you want to do, and then describing what the procedure will be. Okay, so you want to find out something about the college experience. So in the past, people have had hypotheses like students who live with one parent are more likely to go to college within 50 miles of their home. It's very specific. Or it might be the students who are the oldest sibling are most likely to go away for college. Whatever that might be, it might be something you're interested in, it might be something your classmates are interested in, but you're going to design this to gather data from your whole grade. Okay, that's your goal. When you're done, you can write it out in your notes and then, and then show it to me. There will be a space in the classroom where you can upload it if you're one of the remote people, and I'll look through it for you and give you any feedback that you might need.